3 minutes and 40 seconds. The pressure in her lungs had moved past pain into something else entirely, a burning that spread through her chest like fire submerged in ice. Petty Officer Second Class Marisol Vega held her position at the bottom of the combat diving pool, her eyes fixed on the murky darkness above where shadows moved along the surface. Her diaphragm spasmed, begging her to breathe, but she had learned years ago that the body lies. It tells you that you are dying long before death is anywhere close. The trick is knowing the difference. Above her, boots paced along the pool deck. She could hear them even through the water, the deliberate rhythm of a man who had broken dozens of candidates and intended to break one more. Master Chief Vernon Stokes checked his stopwatch for the third time in 30 seconds, and though Marisol could not see his face from 15 feet below, she knew exactly what expression he wore. Anticipation, the same cold satisfaction he had shown every time a female candidate washed out of his program. For minutes now, her vision started to narrow at the edges, darkness creeping in like a tide. Most people panicked at this point. Most people shot to the surface, gasping, defeated. Marisol thought about her brother Diego instead. She thought about the flag they had folded and handed to her mother. She thought about the sniper who had missed a shot and the 8 men who died because the right person was not in position. She was the right person. She just had to prove it. Before we continue with Marisol's story, drop a comment and let us know what state you are watching from. Maybe you have seen someone in your life fight against impossible odds. Maybe you know what it means to refuse to quit when everyone expects you to fail. At 4 minutes and 12 seconds, Master Chief Stokes finally spoke. Everybody out of the pool. The other candidates surfaced immediately, their relief obvious in the way they scrambled for the edges. Marisol rose slowly, controlled, breaking the surface without a gasp. She filled her lungs in measured breaths while the other trainees hauled themselves onto the deck, coughing and shaking. Stokes watched her climb out. He was a tall man, weathered by 26 years of service, with eyes that had seen enough death to fill several lifetimes. Those eyes tracked Marisol now with something between contempt and curiosity. "Vega," he said, "you think holding your breath makes you special?" "No, Master Chief." Marisol kept her voice flat, controlled. "I think it makes me useful." Something flickered across his face. Not approval, never approval, but perhaps the faintest acknowledgement that she had not given him the reaction he wanted. He turned away, addressing the full group of candidates. "Tomorrow we run the night evolution. Full gear, open ocean, 3 nautical miles. Anyone who cannot handle that should pack their bags tonight and save us all the trouble." The other candidates exchanged glances. Marisol did not look at any of them. She had learned during her first week that seeking allies only gave Stokes ammunition. Instead, she focused on controlling her breathing, on slowing her heart rate back to normal, on ignoring the way her muscles trembled from oxygen deprivation. One of the other trainees, a tall man named Tobias Okonkwo, was still in the water. Marisol noticed him gripping the pool edge with white knuckles, his face twisted in pain. Cramp. She recognized it immediately. His calf had seized during the breath hold, and now he could not pull himself out without making it obvious. Stokes was already walking toward the equipment room. The other candidates were grabbing their towels, paying no attention to Toby struggling at the pool edge. Marisol crossed the deck in 4 quick strides. She knelt at the edge and extended her hand without a word. Toby looked up at her, pride and pain warring in his expression. For a moment, she thought he would refuse. Then his jaw tightened and he grabbed her wrist. She hauled him up in one smooth motion, putting her body between him and the direction Stokes had gone. Toby collapsed onto the deck, immediately pressing both hands into his cramped calf muscle. "Thanks," he managed through gritted teeth. "Stretch it out before you stand." Marisol kept her voice low. "And drink more water before the night evolution. Cramps like that will get you killed in open ocean." Toby looked at her with new eyes. She did not wait for him to respond. She grabbed her towel and headed for the locker room, leaving wet footprints on the concrete. That night, alone in her bunk after lights out, Marisol pulled out the photograph she kept in her pillowcase. Diego smiled up at her, frozen forever in his dress whites. The picture taken 3 days before his final deployment. He had the same dark eyes she did, the same stubborn set to his jaw. He had believed in her when no one else did. He had told her she would do things that mattered. She pressed the photograph to her chest and closed her eyes. 3 years since the ambush. 3 years since the phone call that had rearranged every atom in her body. 3 years of fighting through every barrier the Navy put in front of her, clawing her way toward the one place she might actually make a difference. And now she was here, in the most demanding program in special warfare, with an instructor who had made it his personal mission to see her fail. Good, she whispered to the photograph. Let him try. The next morning, Marisol was the first candidate on the beach. The sun had not yet risen over Coronado, and the Pacific stretched out black and endless before her. She could taste salt on her lips, feel the cold February wind cutting through her wetsuit. Behind her, the other candidates gathered in silence, their faces tight with apprehension. Master Chief Stokes emerged from the darkness like something the ocean had created specifically to test them. He carried no clipboard, no equipment, just a stopwatch in his eyes. Vega, he said, and Marisol felt every gaze shift to her. You did well in the pool yesterday. He paused, and she knew before he spoke again that nothing good would follow. That is why tonight you will run a special evolution. Solo, no booty, no safety diver within 500 meters. Let us see if you can hold your breath when the ocean is trying to kill you. The other candidates shifted uncomfortably. Even Toby looked away. A solo night dive in open ocean was not standard training. It was punishment dressed up as assessment. Marisol met Stokes directly in the eyes. When do I start, Master Chief? He almost smiled. Almost. 2100 hours. Do not be late. He walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing on the dark beach with the weight of what was coming pressing down on her shoulders. Tomorrow he would show her what this program really demanded, and nobody with her limitations had ever made it past day 3. The hours before the solo dive passed in a blur of routine training that Marisol barely registered. Her mind kept drifting to the black water waiting for her, to the cold and the pressure and the absolute isolation of swimming alone in the Pacific at night. She had done difficult things before. She had pushed her body past limits that doctors said were impossible. But there was something different about what Stokes had planned for her, something that felt less like assessment and more like execution. During the afternoon rifle qualification, she put every round within the center ring. Stokes watched from behind the firing line, his expression unchanged. When she cleared her weapon and stepped back, he walked past her without a word. But she caught him glancing at her target, and she saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Good shooting, Toby said quietly as they collected their gear. He had been keeping his distance since the pool, but something in his posture had shifted. Where did you learn to shoot like that? Marisol ejected her magazine and began cleaning her rifle. My brother taught me. Before he deployed. Toby was quiet for a moment. He did not ask the obvious question, and she appreciated that more than she could say. Instead, he just nodded and went back to his own weapon. The other candidates avoided her entirely. She understood. Associating with the person Stokes had marked for destruction was a good way to get mark yourself. They were not cruel about it, just practical. She would have done the same thing in their position. Probably. At 1900 hours, 2 hours before her evolution, Marisol sat alone in the equipment room, checking her gear for the 3rd time. Batsuit, fins, musk, kumpas, divanifa, amarjangiveakun. Everything regulation. Everything in perfect condition. None of it would matter if the ocean decided to kill her, but at least she would not give Stokes the satisfaction of equipment failure. The door opened behind her. She expected Stokes come to deliver some final psychological blow before sending her into the water. Instead, she found Lieutenant Commander Harlan Cross standing in the doorway, his dress uniform pristine, his smile carrying all the warmth of a fluorescent light. Petty Officer Vega, he said, I wanted to wish you luck tonight. Marisol stood at attention. Thank you, sir. Cross stepped into the room, letting the door swing shut behind him. He was the officer who had approved her application to the program, and she had spent the past 3 weeks trying to figure out why. Now, watching him examine her gear with theatrical interest, she began to understand. You know, he said, there's no shame in recognizing when a challenge exceeds your capabilities. The program will still be here. Other opportunities will arise. Sometimes the bravest thing a sailor can do is acknowledge their limitations. The words were wrapped in concern, but Marisol heard what lived underneath them. He wanted her to quit. He wanted to be able to say he had given a woman a fair chance, and she had chosen to walk away. It would look so much better than having Stokes break her in the open ocean. I appreciate your concern, sir. Marisol kept her voice perfectly neutral. But I am looking forward to the evolution. Cross studied her for a long moment. His smile never flickered, but something cold moved behind his eyes. Of course you are. He turned and walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the frame. Just remember, Vega, the ocean does not care about making history. It only cares about making bodies. He left before she could respond. Marisol stood alone in the equipment room, her hands trembling slightly. Not from fear, from anger, from the crystallizing realization that she was fighting on multiple fronts against enemies who wanted her to fail for entirely different reasons. At 2100 hours exactly, Marisol stood on the beach in full gear. The moon had risen over the water, casting just enough light to see the swells rolling toward shore. Somewhere out there, 3 nautical miles from where she stood, was the marker buoy she had to reach and return from. Alone, in the dark, with no safety diver close enough to matter. Master Chief Stokes materialized beside her. He carried a radio and nothing else. You have 4 hours, he said. The marker buoy has a transponder. Touch it and your signal registers. If you do not touch it, you fail. If you surface before reaching it, you fail. If you activate your emergency beacon, you fail. He paused, and for just a moment something almost human flickered across his face. The ocean is cold tonight. Hypothermia is a real risk. If you start to lose motor control, surface immediately. A failed evolution is better than a dead sailor. Marisol turned to face him. Is that concern, Master Chief? The human moment vanished. That is me telling you the rules. He checked his watch. You are burning time. She walked into the water without looking back. The cold hit her immediately, seeping through her wetsuit like needles made of ice. She kept walking until the bottom dropped away, then began swimming with steady, economical strokes. Behind her, the beach grew smaller. Ahead of her, nothing but black water and the distant promise of a marker buoy that might as well have been on the moon. 20 minutes into the swim, Marisol found her rhythm. Stroke, stroke, breathe. Stroke, stroke, breathe. The cold had numbed her extremities, but her core stayed warm. Her technique stayed clean. She navigated by compass and stars, the way Diego had taught her during those long summer nights when they would take their father's boat out past the harbor lights. He had known even then that she was meant for the water. He had seen something in her that nobody else could see, a capacity for stillness and endurance that went beyond normal human limits. When she told him she wanted to join the Navy, he had not laughed the way their parents did. He had just nodded and said she would do things that mattered. Now she was swimming alone through a black ocean, trying to prove that he was right. At the 90-minute mark, she reached the buoy. Her fingers were numb as she pressed them against the transponder, but she felt the click of registration. Halfway done, she allowed herself 3 seconds of rest, floating in the darkness with nothing but stars above and fathoms below. Then she turned and began the long swim back. The return journey was harder. Fatigue had settled into her muscles, and the cold was no longer something she could ignore. She could feel her stroke deteriorating, her kick losing power. Her body was screaming at her to stop, to surface, to activate the beacon and end this. She thought about Diego. She thought about the sniper who missed. She thought about every woman who would come after her, and whether they would get a chance at all if she failed tonight. Stroke, stroke, breathe. Stroke, stroke, breathe. 3 hours and 47 minutes after entering the water, Marisol Vega walked out of the Pacific Ocean and collapsed on the beach at Master Chief Stokes' feet. Her body was shaking uncontrollably, her lips blue, her fingers so numb she could not feel them at all. Stokes stood over her in silence. Then he pulled a thermal blanket from his pack and dropped it across her shoulders. "Day 3, he said. "Most people quit by now." He turned and walked toward the base, calling back over his shoulder. "Tomorrow I will show you what this program really demands. Getting through one night means nothing. Breaking you will just take a little longer than I thought." The week following the solo dive blurred into a relentless grind of training evolutions that left Marisol with barely enough energy to eat before collapsing into her bunk each night. Stokes had not eased up after her successful ocean swim. If anything, he had intensified his focus on her, assigning her the most difficult tasks, the longest watches, the heaviest equipment loads. She carried it all without complaint, and each time she completed an evolution his expression grew a shade darker. On the 8th day, Stokes announced a paired combat diving exercise. Full tactical approach to a simulated target vessel, underwater the entire way, synchronized ascent for a simultaneous breach. He paired Marisol with Toby, and she caught the flicker of calculation in his eyes. He was testing whether her success in the solo dive had been luck or skill. He was also testing whether Toby would let himself be dragged down by partnering with her. The exercise was scheduled for dawn. Marisol and Toby spent the night before reviewing approach vectors and hand signals, speaking in the clipped shorthand of operators who had no time for wasted words. Somewhere during those hours, the distance Toby had been keeping finally collapsed. "You really held your breath for over 4 minutes in that pool," he said. It was not quite a question. 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Marisol checked her regulator for the 3rd time. "I have done longer." Toby shook his head slowly. "I have been diving since I was 16. Best I ever managed was 3.5, and I nearly blacked out." "How do you do it?" She considered the question. Most people fought their body's panic response, tried to suppress it through willpower alone. That approach had limits. What Marisol had learned, through years of competitive freediving before she ever joined the Navy, was something different. "You do not fight the panic," she said. "You let it pass through you. Your body says you are dying, but you know that is not true yet. So you observe the fear without reacting to it. Eventually it fades, and you have more time than you thought." Toby was quiet for a long moment. "That is either the most enlightened thing I have ever heard or completely insane. Probably both." Marisol allowed herself a small smile. "Get some sleep. We have 4 hours until the evolution." The exercise went flawlessly. Marisol and Toby moved through the dark water like extensions of the same mind, their timing precise, their approach silent. When they breached the surface beside the target vessel at exactly the same moment, Marisol saw something in Stokes that she had not seen before. Not approval, but absence of disapproval. For him, that was practically a standing ovation. After the debrief, as the other candidates scattered toward the mess hall, a woman in a senior chief's uniform intercepted Marisol on the path. "Petty Officer Vega." The woman's voice carried the particular weight of someone who had spent decades earning respect the hard way. "Walk with me." Marisol fell in a step beside her, noting the EOD badge on the woman's chest, the combat action ribbon, the rows of service stripes on her sleeve. This was Senior Chief Elena Vasquez, one of the first women to qualify in Navy explosive ordnance disposal. Marisol had heard her name spoken in whispers, always with reverence. They walked in silence until they reached a quiet stretch of beach away from the training facilities. Vasquez stopped and stared out at the ocean for a long moment before speaking. "I knew your brother," she said. Marisol felt the words hit her like a physical blow. She kept her face neutral through pure force of will. "Diego was 2 years behind me in the pipeline," Vasquez continued. "Talented, dedicated. He talked about you constantly. Said you're going to change things." Marisol's throat tightened. She did not trust herself to speak. Vasquez turned to face her. "I have been watching you since you arrived. You're everything Diego said you were. Maybe more, but I need you to understand something." She paused, choosing her words carefully. Master Chief Stokes is not just trying to break you because you are a woman. There's history there. History that connects to your brother in ways you do not know yet. What kind of history? Marisol's voice came out steadier than she expected. That is not my story to tell. Vasquez's expression softened slightly. But I wanted you to know that what you are facing is not just prejudice. It is pain. And pain makes people do things that logic cannot explain. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object, pressing it into Marisol's palm. A challenge coin, worn smooth by years of handling. The EOD crest on one side, a name engraved on the other. Diego Vega. I was going to give this to your family, Vasquez said, but I think he would want you to have it now, to carry with you through whatever comes next. Marisol closed her fingers around the coin. The metal was warm from Vasquez's pocket, and she could almost imagine it still held some trace of her brother's touch. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because you deserve to know that this fight is more complicated than it appears. And because when the truth finally comes out, I want you to be ready for it. Vasquez started walking back toward the base, then paused. There are things about your brother's death that you do not know. Things that connect to why Stokes is the way he is. But if you want to hear that story, you need to survive the next 2 weeks first. Marisol watched her go, Diego's coin pressing in her palm like a brand. That night, she lay awake in her bunk, turning the coin over and over in her fingers. The darkness around her was filled with the steady breathing of sleeping candidates. But Marisol's mind would not quiet. What did Vasquez know about Diego's death? What connection could possibly exist between her brother and a man who seemed determined to destroy her career? She thought about the official report. An ambush during a routine patrol. Enemy contact from multiple positions. The Overwatch sniper had failed to neutralize the threat in time. 8 men dead, including Diego. A tragedy of war, nothing more. But Vasquez's words suggested otherwise. There was history. There was pain. There was something Marisol did not know. She pressed the coin to her lips and made a silent promise to her brother. She would survive the next 2 weeks. She would uncover whatever truth Vasquez was hiding. And she would make sure that Diego's death meant something more than just another name on a memorial wall. In the bunk across from her, Toby shifted in his sleep. Down the hall, she could hear the watch officer making rounds. Somewhere in the distance, waves crashed against the Coronado shore in an endless rhythm that sounded almost like breathing. Marisol finally closed her eyes, but her dreams were full of dark water and unanswered questions. The next morning, Stokes gathered the candidates before sunrise. His face was carved from stone, his voice flat and cold. Today we begin the integration phase, he said. Combat, diving combined with precision marksmanship. You will approach underwater, surface, acquire target, and fire. One shot. No second chances. His eyes found Marisol in the formation. Some of you have shown promise in isolated skills. Now we will see if you can put them together when it matters. He smiled then, and there was nothing human in it. The evaluation begins in 1 hour. I suggest you use that time to make peace with whatever gods you believe in. The integration evaluation was designed to break them. Marisol understood that the moment she saw the course layout. A 500-meter underwater approach through a kelp forest, followed by a surface transition into a shooting position on a rocky outcrop, where a single steel target waited at 300 meters. One shot, no warm-up, no second chances. And the approach had to be completed in under 12 minutes, which meant swimming at near maximum effort, and then somehow steadying her hands enough to hit a target the size of a dinner plate. Most snipers needed minutes of controlled breathing to achieve the stillness required for a 300-meter shot. Marisol would have seconds. The candidates went one at a time, spaced 15 minutes apart. Stokes positioned himself on the outcrop beside the shooting station, stopwatch in one hand, binoculars in the other. He would watch every approach, every transition, every trigger pull. There would be nowhere to hide. Toby went third. Marisol watched him disappear beneath the surface and counted the minutes until he emerged on the rocks. His shot hit the target but wide, catching the outer ring. Stokes marked something on his clipboard without expression. Marisol was 7th. By the time her turn came, the sun had climbed high enough to warm the surface water, but she knew the kelp forest below would be cold and dark. She checked her rifle one final time, sealed it in the waterproof case, strapped to her back, and waded into the Pacific. The underwater approach was brutal. Kelp wrapped around her limbs like grasping fingers, and the current fought her every stroke. She navigated by compass and instinct, pushing through the burning in her muscles, the ache in her lungs each time she snatched a breath at the surface. 11 minutes and 40 seconds. She was cutting it close. She reached the outcrop with 18 seconds to spare. Her hands were shaking from exertion as she hauled herself onto the rocks, unstrapped her rifle case, and assembled her weapon. Stokes stood 3 meters away, his presence a physical weight she forced herself to ignore. 12 seconds to steady her breathing. She thought about what she had told Toby. You do not fight the panic. You let it pass through you. Her heart was hammering from the swim, her diaphragm still heaving, but she let the sensations flow without resistance. She became an observer of her own body rather than a prisoner of it. 8 seconds. She settled into her shooting position, cheek pressed against the stock, eye finding the scope. 5 seconds. The target swam into focus, a steel plate gleaming in the midday sun. 300 meters. No wind. She had made this shot 1,000 times in training. 3 seconds. Her finger found the trigger. Her breathing slowed to nothing. 1 second. She squeezed. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. Downrange, the steel plate rang like a bell, the bullet hole dead center. Marisol lowered her weapon and looked at Stokes. His face betrayed nothing, but she saw his hand tighten around the clipboard. Adequate, he said. Then he turned and walked away without another word. That night, the other candidates talked about the evaluation in low voices. Most had hit the target somewhere. A few had missed entirely. Only Marisol had put her round in the center ring, and she could feel the shift in how the others looked at her. Not quite acceptance, but something close to respect. Toby found her on the beach after evening chow, sitting alone with Diego's challenge coin in her palm. Center ring, he said, dropping onto the sand beside her. After that swim, I have never seen anything like it. Marisol turned the coin over in her fingers. My brother used to say that pressure is just weight. You can let it crush you, or you can let it make you stronger. He taught you well. Toby was quiet for a moment, watching the waves. For what it is worth, I'm glad I got paired with you. Some of the others think Stokes is right about women in combat roles. I used to wonder myself. He paused. I do not wonder anymore. Before Marisol could respond, a figure emerged from the shadows near the equipment shed. Lieutenant Commander Cross, his uniform pristine even at this hour, his smile carrying that familiar false warmth. Petty Officer Vega, he said. Impressive performance today. May I have a word in private? Toby stood immediately, giving Marisol a look that said be careful before walking back toward the barracks. Cross watched him go, then turned his attention to Marisol. You are making quite a name for yourself, he said. The instructors are talking. Even Master Chief Stokes seems impressed. He let the word hang in the air like bait. Marisol remained seated, forcing Cross to look down at her. Is there something you need, sir? Cross's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. I need you to understand the position you are putting the program in. Every success you achieve raises expectations. Every standard you meet makes it harder to explain when the next female candidate fails. He clasped his hands behind his back. There are people above my pay grade who approved your admission as a gesture, a symbolic nod to changing times. They did not expect you to actually succeed. Then they underestimated me. Marisol kept her voice flat. Sir, perhaps. Cross tilted his head, studying her like a specimen under glass. Or perhaps they understood something you do not. That one exceptional woman does not change the fundamental realities of combat. That your success here will create pressure to lower standards elsewhere. That in trying to prove yourself, you may be setting a trap for every woman who comes after you. Marisol stood slowly, bringing herself to eye level with the lieutenant commander. With respect, sir, I'm not trying to prove anything about women. I'm trying to prove something about myself. If the Navy cannot tell the difference, that is not my problem. Something ugly flickered behind Cross's eyes, there and gone in an instant. We will see, petty officer. We will see. He turned and walked into the darkness, leaving Marisol alone with the sound of waves and the cold weight of understanding. Stokes wanted her to fail because of pain she did not yet understand. Cross wanted her to fail because her success threatened a comfortable status quo. And somewhere in the space between them, she had to find a way to survive. She looked down at Diego's coin, rubbing her thumb across his engraved name. The next morning brought a new evolution, more demanding than the last. And the morning after that brought another. Marisol met each one with the same quiet determination, the same refusal to break. She was still standing when other candidates began to wash out, still performing when bodies and minds around her reached their limits. But on the 14th day, everything changed. She returned to her bunk after evening chow to find an envelope on her pillow. No name, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a letter written in a hand she did not recognize. The date at the top was from 3 years ago, 2 weeks before Diego died. And the name signed at the bottom made her blood run cold. Ryan Kelleher, the sniper who missed a shot, the man whose failure had killed her brother. The letter was addressed to Diego himself, and it mentioned a shot that was never supposed to be Ryan's to take. Marisol read the letter 3 times before her hands stopped shaking enough to hold the paper steady. Ryan Kelleher's handwriting was cramped and urgent, the words of a man wrestling with something he could not escape. Diego, the letter began. I need to tell you something before we deploy. Something that has been eating at me since the briefing. The primary Overwatch position is compromised. Everyone knows it. The intel is bad, the sightlines are wrong, and command is ignoring every objection I raise. They are sending us anyway. I am supposed to be backup. Secondary position, supporting fire only. But if the primary goes down, and it will, I will be the only one with eyes on your unit. And Diego, that shot is beyond my range. I have told them. I have shown them the calculations. They do not care. They say I will figure it out when the time comes. I am scared, Diego. Not of dying. Scared of failing. Scared of being the reason good men do not come home. I know you trust me. I know the whole unit trusts me. But I'm not the sniper they think I am. I'm not the sniper they need me to be. If something happens out there, I need you to know that I try to stop it. I try to tell them. Nobody listened. Your friend, Ryan. The letter was dated 14 days before the ambush that killed Diego and 7 other men. 14 days before Ryan Kelleher missed the shot that could have saved them. 2 weeks of knowing what was coming and being powerless to stop it. Marisol sat on her bunk in the darkness, the letter clutched in her fist, and felt everything she thought she knew about her brother's death rearrange itself into a new and terrible shape. For 3 years, she had blamed Ryan Kelleher. For 3 years, she had imagined him as incompetent, careless, a failure who cost lives through his own inadequacy. She had joined this program partly to become the sniper Ryan never was, to ensure that no one else's brother died, because the Overwatch position was held by someone who could not make the shot. But Ryan had known. He had tried to warn them. He had been placed in an impossible position by commanders who ignored his concerns. And when the moment came, he had done exactly what he predicted. He had failed, not because he was incompetent, because he was set up to fail. The tears came without warning. Marisol pressed her palm against her mouth to muffle the sounds, her body shaking with grief that had found a new target. She cried for Diego, dead in a dusty street, because someone above Ryan's pay grade had decided that concerns from a junior sniper were not worth addressing. She cried for Ryan, carrying the weight of 8 deaths that were never his fault. And she cried for herself, for the years of misdirected anger that had driven her here. She did not know how long she sat there in the darkness. Long enough for the barracks to fall completely silent. Long enough for the moon to shift position in the window. Long enough for the sharpest edge of grief to dull into something she could survive. A soft knock on the doorframe made her look up. Toby stood in the entrance, his expression carefully neutral. I saw your light was off, but you were not sleeping, he said quietly. Wanted to make sure you were okay. Marisol wiped her face with the back of her hand. She should send him away. She should maintain the walls she had built to survive this program. But something in her was too tired to pretend anymore. "I'm not okay," she said, "but I will be." Toby crossed the room and sat on the floor beside her bunk, his back against the wall. He did not ask questions. He did not offer platitudes. He just sat there, a solid presence in the darkness, and let the silence do what words could not. After a long moment, Marisol spoke. "My brother died 3 years ago. I blamed the sniper who missed the shot. I have spent every day since then trying to become good enough that I would never miss the way he did." She paused, her voice cracking. "I just found out it was not his fault. He tried to warn them. Nobody listened." Toby was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Does knowing that change what you are doing here?" Marisol considered the question. The anger that had fueled her for 3 years was gone, burned away by the truth in Ryan's letter. But something else remained, something deeper. "No," she said finally, "it does not change what I am doing. It changes why." She looked at Diego's challenge coin, still clutched in her other hand. She had been fighting to prove that the right person in the right position could make the difference between life and death. That was still true, but now she understood that the fight was bigger than just being good enough. It was about being heard, about refusing to let commanders ignore warnings from the people who knew better, about never letting another Ryan Kelleher be set up to fail. Toby nodded slowly. "For what it is worth," he said, "I think your brother will be proud of you." The words hit her like a wave, washing away some of the weight she had been carrying. She did not trust herself to respond, so she just nodded. They sat together in silence until the first gray light of dawn began to creep through the window. Then Toby stood, stretched, and headed for the door. "Training in 2 hours," he said. "Whatever you are carrying, you do not have to carry it alone." After he left, Marisol read the letter one more time. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it into her pocket alongside Diego's coin. 2 pieces of her brother's story finally coming together. She thought about Senior Chief Vasquez's words. "There are things about your brother's death that you do not know. Things that connect to why Stokes is the way he is." The letter answered some questions, but raised others. Who was Ryan Kelleher to Stokes? Why did his failure, a failure that was never really his fault, turn Stokes into the man he was today? The answers were close now. She could feel them waiting just beyond her reach. But first she had to survive the day ahead, and the day after that, and however many days it took until the truth finally surfaced. Marisol stood, splashed cold water on her face, and began preparing for morning training. Her eyes were red and her body was exhausted, but something in her core had shifted. The grief was still there, but it had transformed into something harder, something that would not break. She walked out to meet the dawn, Diego's coin pressing against her chest like a heartbeat. When she reached the training ground, Stokes was already waiting. His eyes found her immediately, and for just a moment, something flickered in his expression. Recognition, understanding, as if he knew exactly what she had spent the night discovering. Then the mask slammed back into place, and his voice rang out across the morning air. "Vega, front and center. Today we find out what you are really made of." The training evolution that morning was punishing, but Marisol moved through it on autopilot, her body executing while her mind churned through everything she had learned. When Stokes dismissed the candidates for midday chow, she did not follow the others to the mess hall. Instead, she walked toward the administrative building, Ryan Kelleher's letter burning in her pocket like a coal. She found Stokes in his office, sitting behind a metal desk covered in evaluation forms. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression told her he had been expecting this visit. "Close the door," he said. Marisol obeyed. She stood at attention in front of his desk, the letter in her hand. "I know you left this for me," she said. "Nobody else would have access to something this personal. Nobody else would want to find it." Stokes leaned back in his chair. His face was unreadable, but his hands gripped the armrests with white-knuckled intensity. "What makes you so sure?" "Because you knew Ryan Kelleher." Marisol kept her voice steady. "You trained him. He was yours, the way every sniper who comes through this program is yours. And when he died, you blamed yourself for not making him good enough." Stokes was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, His voice was stripped of its usual cold authority. It carried something rawer, something human. Ryan Kelleher was the best student I ever had, he said. Natural shooter. Perfect instincts. I pushed him harder than anyone because I saw what he could become. When he graduated, I thought I had created something extraordinary. He paused, his jaw tightening. I was wrong. Marisol waited. She could feel the weight of what was coming, the revelation that would finally explain everything. The mission that killed your brother was compromised from the start, Stokes continued. Bad intel from a female intelligence officer who was more concerned with her career than getting the details right. The primary Overwatch position was exposed. Ryan knew it. He filed objections through every channel available to him. Nobody listened. He looked up at Marisol, and she saw the grief carved into the lines of his face. When the ambush happened, Ryan was the only one with a shot. 350 meters, crosswind, moving target. A shot maybe 5 people in the world could make. He missed by inches. 8 men died, including your brother. Marisol felt her throat tighten. The letter told me he tried to warn them. He did. Stokes stood and walked to the window, staring out at the Pacific. And after the mission, he could not live with what happened. He requested the most dangerous assignments he could find, took risks that made no tactical sense. I tried to pull him back, tried to make him understand that it was not his fault. But Ryan was convinced that he had to prove himself, that he had to make up for the men he could not save. His voice dropped. 6 months later, he died in an operation that should never have been approved. Killed trying to be the hero he thought he had failed to be. The silence stretched between them. Marisol thought about Ryan's letter, about the fear and responsibility that had crushed him long before the bullet that took his life. You blame the intelligence officer, she said quietly. You blame her for the bad intel that started everything. Stokes turned to face her. His eyes were hard, but beneath the hardness, she could see the wound that had never healed. I blamed her for years. I blamed the system that put Ryan in an impossible position. I blamed everyone except the people who actually pulled the triggers in that ambush. He paused, and when women started pushing into combat roles, I saw her face in every one of them. I saw another chance for someone to get my people killed through incompetence or carelessness. And that is why you have been trying to break me. Marisol did not phrase it as a question. I have been trying to make sure you can handle what this job demands. Stokes walked back to his desk, but did not sit. Because if you cannot handle me, you sure as hell cannot handle combat. He met her eyes directly. But I left you that letter because you deserve to know the truth. Your brother died because the system failed him. Ryan died because I could not save him from his own guilt. And I have spent 3 years taking that out on people who had nothing to do with any of it. It was not an apology. Marisol understood that Stokes was not capable of apology. Not yet, maybe not ever. But it was something, an acknowledgement, a crack in the armor he had worn for so long. Before she could respond, the door burst open. Senior Chief Vasquez stood in the entrance, her expression urgent. Master Chief, we have a situation. Captain Holloway needs you in the command center immediately. She glanced at Marisol. Both of you. 20 minutes later, Marisol stood in a room filled with screens and tactical displays, surrounded by officers she had only seen from a distance. Captain Diane Holloway, the base commander, was a compact woman with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. She addressed the room with clipped efficiency. 72 hours ago, we confirmed the location of a high-value target in a coastal compound overseas. The target is responsible for the deaths of multiple American service members and is planning additional attacks. We have a narrow window for elimination before he relocates. She pressed a button, and a satellite image appeared on the main screen. A heavily guarded compound on a rocky coastline, surrounded by cliffs on 3 sides and water on the 4th. The only viable approach is underwater, Holloway continued, through a submerged cave system that surfaces inside the compound perimeter. The sniper position has a clear line on the target's location, but the window will be less than 2 seconds. And the final underwater approach requires approximately 4 minutes without surfacing. Marisol felt every eye in the room shift toward her. Holloway met her gaze. Petty Officer Vega, You're the only candidate in this program with a specific combination of skills required for this mission. Extended breath hold capacity, precision marksmanship, combat diving certification. She paused. I need to know if you are ready. Marisol thought about Diego. She thought about Ryan. She thought about every moment of the past 3 weeks that had led her to this room. She looked at Stokes, standing rigid against the wall. His face was expressionless, but his eyes held something new. Not quite faith, but the absence of doubt. Yes, Captain, Marisol said. I am ready. Holloway nodded. Then we have work to do. She turned to the tactical officers. Begin mission planning. We deploy in 48 hours. The room erupted into controlled chaos. Officers and specialists moving with practiced urgency. Marisol stood at the center of it all, feeling the weight of what was coming settle onto her shoulders. This was what she had trained for, what she had fought for, what Diego had believed she could become. One shot, one chance, no second chances. She was ready. The next 48 hours dissolved into a whirlwind of mission planning, equipment preparation, and tactical rehearsals. Marisol studied satellite imagery until the compound's layout was burned into her memory. She practiced the underwater approach in the combat pool, swimming blind through obstacles meant to simulate the cave system, surfacing and acquiring targets in the 2-second window she would have. She stripped and reassembled her rifle until her hands could do it without conscious thought. She was not alone. The mission required a support team for extraction, and Captain Holloway had assigned 4 operators to accompany her. Toby was among them, his selection a testament to how far their partnership had come. The others were seasoned special warfare veterans who regarded Marisol with professional neutrality. They did not care about her gender or her history with Stokes. They cared about whether she could execute when it mattered. On the evening before deployment, Senior Chief Vasquez found Marisol alone in the equipment room, running final checks on her gear. I heard you talk to Stokes, Vasquez said, leaning against the doorframe. Heard he told you about Ryan. Marisol nodded without looking up. He left the letter for me to find. I think he wanted me to understand. Vasquez was quiet for a moment. Vernon Stokes is not a good man, but he is not a bad one either. He is just broken, like a lot of us who have been in this business too long. She crossed the room and sat on the bench beside Marisol. What he did to you in training was wrong. But what he did tonight, telling you the truth, that took something he does not have much of left. What is that? Courage. Vasquez reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object. Not the physical kind. The kind that makes you face the things you have been running from. She pressed the object into Marisol's palm. It was a photograph, creased and faded, showing 2 young men in desert camouflage with their arms around each other's shoulders. One of them was Diego, his smile bright and unguarded. The other was Ryan Kelleher, leaner and more serious, but with warmth in his eyes. They were friends, Vasquez said. Good friends. Diego knew about Ryan's concerns before the mission. He tried to escalate them through his own chain of command. Nobody listened to him either. Marisol stared at the photograph, at her brother's face frozen in a moment of happiness she had never witnessed. Diego had never mentioned Ryan in his letters home. He had never spoken about the fear that must have been growing as the mission approached. He had protected their family from the weight he was carrying, right up until the end. Why are you giving me this? She asked. Because tomorrow you're going to do something that Diego and Ryan could not. Vasquez's voice was steady. You're going to be the right person in the right position at the right time. And when you take that shot, I want you to know that you are carrying both of them with you. Marisol closed her fingers around the photograph. The paper was soft with age, worn smooth by years of handling. She wondered how many times Vasquez had looked at this image, remembering the men who never came home. Thank you, she said, for everything. Vasquez stood and headed for the door. Then she paused, looking back over her shoulder. Your brother believed in you. Ryan would have too. Do not let them down. After Vasquez left, Marisol sat alone with the photograph and Diego's challenge coin, 2 pieces of a past she was only beginning to understand. Tomorrow she would enter hostile territory. Tomorrow she would swim through darkness toward a target that had killed Americans and planned to kill more. Tomorrow she would have one chance to do what Ryan could not. She was not afraid. Fear was just weight, and she had learned to carry heavier things. The mission briefing took place at 0400 in a secure room beneath the command center. Captain Holloway walked the team through every phase of the operation, from insertion to extraction, with the precision of someone who had planned dozens of missions and lost sleep over everyone. "The target is Ahmad Rashidi," Holloway said, pointing to a surveillance photograph on the main screen. A lean man with cold eyes stared back at them. Former military officer turned terrorist coordinator. Responsible for at least 12 attacks on American forces over the past 2 years. He moves constantly, never staying in one location for more than 72 hours. "This is our window." She switched to a tactical overlay of the compound. "Rashidi takes his morning tea on this balcony at 06:15 local time, every day without exception. Is his only predictable behavior. The balcony is visible from a rock formation inside the compound perimeter, accessible only through the underwater cave system." Holloway looked at Marisol. "Petty Officer Vega will make the approach alone. The cave system is too narrow for multiple operators with full gear. She will surface, acquire the target, and take the shot. Support team will hold position at the cave entrance for extraction." Toby raised his hand. "What is the contingency if the shot misses?" "It will not miss," Marisol said quietly. The room fell silent. Holloway studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Vega is correct. There is no contingency for a miss. If the shot fails, Rashidi will relocate within hours. We will not get another chance." Stokes spoke for the first time. He had been standing in the shadows at the back of the room, his presence unexpected but not questioned. "The approach requires approximately 4 minutes underwater in the final stretch. No surfacing. Vega has demonstrated this capability in training. She will execute." There was something in his voice that Marisol had never heard before. Confidence, not in himself, but in her. Holloway closed the briefing folder. "Transport leaves in 2 hours. Get your gear and say whatever goodbyes you need to say." She paused. "This mission matters. The people in this room are the only ones who can make it happen. Do not let me down." The team dispersed to make final preparations. Marisol was checking her rifle one last time when Toby appeared beside her. "You ready for this?" he asked. She thought about Diego, about Ryan, about every moment that had led her to this place. She thought about the 4 minutes of darkness waiting for her beneath hostile waters, and a single shot that would prove everything she had fought to become. "I have been ready my whole life," she said. "I just did not know it until now." Toby nodded. He did not offer luck or encouragement. He simply extended his hand, and Marisol shook it firmly. "See you on the other side," he said. 2 hours later, Marisol boarded the transport that would carry her toward the mission. Diego's coin was in her pocket, Ryan's photograph tucked beside it. The faces of her brother and his friend pressed against her heart as the aircraft lifted into the darkness. Ahead of her lay the ocean, the cave, and the shot that would change everything. She was ready. The transport touched down on a carrier deck somewhere in waters that did not officially exist. Marisol felt the jolt of landing reverberate through her bones as she gathered her gear and followed the team into the controlled chaos of a vessel preparing for combat operations. Sailors moved with practiced efficiency around them, their faces carefully blank, trained not to notice the operators who passed through on missions they would never hear about. A petty officer escorted them to a briefing room below deck where final intelligence updates waited. The target's pattern had held. Ahmad Rashidi was still at the compound, still taking his morning tea on the balcony at 06:15. The window remained open. Insertion was scheduled for 0300 local time. A rigid hull inflatable boat would carry them to within 2 nautical miles of the coastline. From there, they would swim. Marisol would break off from the support team at the cave entrance, navigate the submerged passage alone, and surface inside the compound perimeter with approximately 90 seconds to spare before Rashidi appeared. 90 seconds to steady her breathing. 90 seconds to acquire her target. 90 seconds between 4 minutes of oxygen deprivation and the most important shot of her life. She spent the hours before insertion in a small compartment the sailors had cleared for the team. Toby dozed in the corner, conserving energy with the discipline of someone who had learned to sleep anywhere. The other operators played cards in low voices, their movements relaxed but their eyes sharp. They had done this before. They would do it again. For them, this was just another mission. For Marisol, it was everything. She pulled out Diego's photograph one last time. Her brother smiled up at her, frozen forever in desert sunlight, his arm around the shoulder of the man who had failed to save him. She studied Ryan Kelleher's face, searching for some sign of the guilt and fear that would eventually destroy him. She found nothing but a young man trying to do his job, unaware of the weight about to crush him. "You did your best," she whispered to the photograph. "Both of you. Now let me do mine." She tucked the image back into her waterproof pouch alongside Diego's coin and closed her eyes. Not to sleep, but to visualize. She walked through the mission in her mind, feeling the cold water close over her head, seeing the darkness of the cave system, timing her strokes to match the rehearsals. She felt her lungs begin to burn at the 3-minute mark, pushed through the panic at 3.5, found a still point beyond 4 minutes where her body stopped screaming and simply waited. She saw herself surface in the gray, pre-dawn light. She felt the rifle rise to her shoulder, the scope finding the balcony, the crosshairs settling on a figure that had killed Americans and would kill more if she failed. She felt her finger take up the slack on the trigger. She saw the shot land. At 02:30, the team assembled on deck. The night was moonless, the sea calm, the stars obscured by a layer of clouds that would help conceal their approach. Marisol checked her gear one final time. Batsuit, fins, musk, rifle sealed in its waterproof case, dive knife strapped to her thigh, compass on her wrist, emergency beacon that she would not use unless extraction became impossible. Toby appeared beside her as they prepared to board the inflatable. He did not speak, just reached out and gripped her shoulder briefly. The gesture said everything words could not. "Good luck. Come back alive. I believe in you." Marisol nodded once, then climbed into the boat. The ride to the insertion point took 45 minutes. The inflatable skimmed across black water, its engine muffled to avoid detection, the operators sitting in silence as the coastline grew from a dark smudge to a looming presence. Marisol could see the cliffs now, jagged shadows against the slightly lighter sky. Somewhere behind those cliffs was the compound. Somewhere on a balcony, a man would soon sit down for his morning tea, unaware that death was swimming toward him through the darkness. At 03:45, the boat slowed to a stop. The team slipped over the side without a splash, disappearing beneath the surface like shadows returning to the dark. Marisol was the last to enter the water. The cold hit her immediately, seeping through her wetsuit and settling into her bones. She welcomed it. Cold meant alertness. Cold meant focus. She had trained in colder waters than this. The swim to the cave entrance took 20 minutes. Marisol navigated by compass and the occasional glimpse of the cliffs above, her strokes steady and economical. The support team flanked her in a loose formation, their presence reassuring even though she could barely see them in the darkness. The cave mouth appeared as a deeper shadow against the underwater rock face. Marisol paused at the entrance, checking her compass one final time. From here, she would go alone. The passage was too narrow for multiple operators, and the mission required silence that only a solo approach could guarantee. Toby materialized beside her, his face barely visible through his mask. He held up 4 fingers, then pointed at his watch. For minutes, the length of time she would be underwater in the final stretch. He pressed his fist to his chest, then extended it toward her, a gesture she recognized from their training together. Trust. She returned the gesture, then turned and swam into the darkness. The cave system was exactly as the intelligence had described. Narrow passages that scraped against her shoulders, sudden turns that required careful navigation, absolute darkness that pressed against her eyes like a physical weight. She moved by feel and compass, counting her strokes, timing her progress against the mental map she had memorized. 3 minutes into the cave, she reached the point of no return. Ahead of her, the passage narrowed further before opening into the final stretch. For minutes of underwater swimming with no opportunity to surface. No air pockets. No margin for error. Marisol paused and took 3 deep breaths, hyperventilating slightly to load her blood with oxygen. She thought about Diego. She thought about Ryan. She thought about every person who had told her she could not do this, and every person who had believed she could. Then she exhaled completely, filled her lungs one final time, and pushed forward into the darkness. The first minute was easy. Her body was fresh, her oxygen reserves full, her strokes smooth and powerful. She navigated the narrow passage by touch, feeling the rock walls guide her toward the opening ahead. The second minute brought the first whispers of discomfort. Her lungs began to feel tight, her diaphragm starting to spasm with the urge to breathe. She acknowledged the sensations without reacting to them, letting them pass through her like waves against a cliff. The third minute was harder. The burning in her chest intensified, and her vision began to narrow at the edges. Her body screamed at her to surface, to breathe, to do anything except keep swimming through this endless darkness. She thought about the training pool at Coronado. She thought about Stokes watching her with a stopwatch, waiting for her to break. She did not break. The fourth minute stretched into eternity. Her lungs were on fire, her limbs growing heavy, her consciousness beginning to fragment at the edges. She could see a faint glow ahead now, the first hint of pre-dawn light filtering down through the water. The exit was close. 30 meters. 20. 10. She burst through the surface with a gasp that echoed off the rocks surrounding her. For a moment, she simply floated, drawing air into her starving lungs, feeling her heart pound against her ribs like a caged animal. Then she checked her watch. 0613. 90 seconds until the target appeared. She had made it. Now came the hard part. Marisol pulled herself onto the rock formation with arms that trembled from oxygen deprivation. Her muscles burned, her vision still carried dark spots at the edges, and her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her teeth. None of that mattered. She had 90 seconds to become perfectly still. She unstrapped the waterproof case from her back and assembled her rifle with hands that moved from pure muscle memory. Stock locked into place. Scope mounted and secured. Magazine inserted with a soft click. She chambered around and settled into her shooting position, pressing her cheek against the familiar curve of the stock. 70 seconds. The compound spread out before her in the gray pre-dawn light. Guard towers at each corner, manned by figures who scanned the perimeter with bored routine. A central courtyard with a fountain that had long since run dry. And there, on the second floor of the main building, a balcony with a small table and 2 chairs. The balcony was empty. 60 seconds. Marisol controlled her breathing with the techniques she had practiced for years. In through the nose for counts. Hold for counts. Out through the mouth for counts. Her heart rate began to slow. The trembling in her hands subsided. The dark spots in her vision faded. 50 seconds. She thought about what she had told Toby in the equipment room a lifetime ago. You do not fight the panic. You let it pass through you. The same principle applied now. Her body wanted to shake. Her lungs wanted to heave. Her mind wanted to race through every possible failure. She let all of it pass through her without resistance, becoming an observer rather than a prisoner. 40 seconds. A door opened on the balcony. Marisol's finger moved to the trigger guard, not yet touching the trigger itself. A servant emerged carrying a silver tray with a teapot and a single cup. He placed them on the table with practiced care, adjusted the chair slightly, and disappeared back inside. 30 seconds. Marisol made her final calculations. Distance to target, 240 meters. Wind, negligible. Elevation, slight downward angle requiring minimal adjustment. She had made this shot hundreds of times in training. She had made it after the brutal swim during the integration evaluation. She could make it now. 20 seconds. The door opened again. Ahmad Rashidi stepped onto the balcony. He was smaller than Marisol had expected, a lean man in simple clothing who moved with the casual confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable. He settled into the chair, poured his tea, and lifted the cup to his lips. 15 seconds. Marisol placed her finger on the trigger. Her breathing had stopped completely now, her body suspended in the stillness between heartbeats. Through the scope, Rashidi's face was perfectly clear. She could see the steam rising from his cup, the slight stubble on his jaw, the relaxed set of his shoulders. This was the man who had killed Americans. The man who had planned to kill more. The man who would never hurt anyone again. 10 seconds. She thought about Diego, about the ambush that took his life while a sniper struggled to make an impossible shot. She thought about Ryan Kelleher, about the guilt that had destroyed him, about the letter he had written knowing he was being set up to fail. She thought about Stokes, about the years of grief that had twisted him into something cruel, about the moment he had chosen to tell her the truth. 5 seconds. She thought about herself, about the woman who had held her breath at the bottom of a training pool while a man with a stopwatch waited for her to break, about the woman who had swum alone through a black ocean to prove she belonged, about the woman who had carried her brother's memory through every obstacle the Navy could throw at her. She was the right person. She was in the right position. She would not miss. 2 seconds. Rashidi lowered his teacup and turned slightly, as if he had heard something in the distance. The movement exposed his center mass perfectly. 1 second. Marisol squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The sound was muffled by the suppressor, a sharp crack that echoed off the rocks and dissipated into the morning air. Downrange, Ahmad Rashidi jerked once and collapsed forward onto the table, his teacup shattering on the stone floor. Center mass. Kill shot. For one frozen moment, the compound was silent. Then chaos erupted. Alarms began to wail. Guards sprinted across the courtyard, shouting in a language Marisol did not understand. Searchlights blazed to life, sweeping the perimeter, hunting for the threat they had never seen coming. Marisol was already moving. She broke down her rifle with the same speed she had assembled it, sealed it in the waterproof case, and slipped back into the water. The extraction point was 300 meters along the coastline, where Toby and the support team would be waiting. She had covered half the distance when the first bullets began to hit the water around her. The guards had found her exit point. They could not see her clearly in the pre-dawn gloom, but they knew someone was in the water, and they were firing at anything that moved. Marisol dove beneath the surface, swimming hard, her lungs screaming after the abuse she had already put them through. A bullet cut through the water 2 feet to her left, leaving a trail of bubbles in its wake. Another struck the rocks ahead of her, sending fragments spinning into the darkness. She changed course, angling away from the compound, putting as much distance as possible between herself and the shooters. Her lungs were burning again. She had been underwater for nearly a minute, and her oxygen reserves were depleted from the cave approach. She needed air. She needed it now. She surfaced for half a second, gasped a single breath, and dove again as bullets stitched the water where her head had been. 200 meters to the extraction point. She could see the faint glow of chemical lights ahead, marking the position where Toby and the team were waiting. She pushed harder, her strokes ragged now, her body running on nothing but adrenaline and will. 100 meters. The gunfire was fading behind her, the guards losing sight of their target in the darkness. Marisol allowed herself to surface more fully, drawing deep breaths as she closed the final distance. Hands reached down and hauled her into the inflatable boat. Toby's face swam into focus above her, his expression a mixture of relief and something that looked almost like awe. Target eliminated, Marisol gasped. Clean shot. The engine roared to life, and the boat leaped forward across the black water, carrying them away from the coastline, away from the compound, away from the body of a man who would never kill again. Marisol lay on the deck of the inflatable, staring up at the stars that were just beginning to fade with the approaching dawn. Her chest heaved, her muscles ached, and she could still taste salt and blood in her mouth. But she was alive. The mission was complete. And somewhere, She knew Diego was proud. The carrier deck was bathed in morning sunlight when the helicopter touched down. Marisol climbed out on legs that still trembled slightly, squinting against the brightness after hours of darkness. The support team followed behind her, their movements loose with the particular relief of operators who had completed a mission and brought everyone home. Captain Holloway was waiting at the edge of the landing zone. Her face betrayed nothing as she watched Marisol approach, but there was something in her posture that spoke of satisfaction barely contained. Target confirmed, eliminated, Holloway said. Clean shot. No friendly casualties. She paused. Outstanding work, Petty Officer Vega. Thank you, Captain. Marisol's voice was hoarse from salt water and exhaustion. Holloway nodded once, then turned to address the full team. Debrief in 2 hours. Get cleaned up, get some food, get some rest if you can. She glanced back at Marisol. You especially. The team dispersed across the deck, heading for showers and bunks, and the kind of quiet decompression that followed every successful operation. Toby fell into step beside Marisol as she walked toward the hatch. That was the most impressive thing I have ever seen, he said quietly. For minutes under, and then a perfect shot while guards were scrambling everywhere. He shook his head. I do not know how you did it. Marisol thought about the question. The honest answer was complicated, woven through with grief and rage and years of preparation for a moment she had not known was coming. But standing here in the sunlight, alive and whole, she found a simpler truth. I had good training, she said, and better reasons. Toby did not ask her to elaborate. He simply nodded and peeled off toward his own quarters, leaving Marisol alone in the narrow passageway below deck. She found the compartment they had assigned her and closed the door behind her. For a long moment, she simply stood there, letting the reality of what she had accomplished wash over her. She had done it. She had made the shot that Ryan could not make, not because she was better than him, but because she had been given the chance he never had. She had been the right person in the right position at the right time. She pulled Diego's coin from her waterproof pouch and held it in her palm. The metal was warm from being pressed against her chest during the entire mission. She closed her fingers around it and brought it to her lips. I did it, she whispered. For you. For Ryan. For everyone. The tears came then, silent and unstoppable. Not tears of grief this time, but something more complex. Relief. Exhaustion. The release of tension she had been carrying for years. She let them fall without trying to stop them. Let her body shake with the force of emotion she had held in check for so long. When the tears finally subsided, she felt lighter, emptied out in a way that made room for something new. She showered, changed into clean clothes, and made her way to the mess hall. Food had never tasted so good. She sat alone at a corner table, working through a tray of eggs and toast and coffee, watching the sailors move around her with the easy rhythm of shipboard life. Halfway through her meal, a shadow fell across her table. She looked up to find Master Chief Stokes standing over her, his expression unreadable. Mind if I sit? He asked. Marisol gestured to the empty chair across from her. Stokes lowered himself into it with the careful movements of a man whose body had absorbed decades of punishment. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Stokes stared at the table, his jaw working slightly, as if he was chewing on words he did not know how to say. I was wrong about you, he said finally. Marisol set down her coffee cup. She had imagined this moment many times during the weeks of training, had fantasized about the satisfaction she would feel when Stokes was forced to acknowledge her abilities. Now that it was happening, she found that satisfaction was not what she felt at all. You are not entirely wrong, she said. You were right that this job demands everything. You were right that most people cannot handle what it requires. She paused. You were just wrong about what disqualifies someone from being able to handle it. Stokes met her eyes. In his gaze, she saw something she had never seen there before. Not defeat exactly, more like the crumbling of a wall he had spent years building. Ryan Kelleher was the best sniper I ever trained, he said quietly. When he missed that shot when your brother died, something broke in him that I could not fix. I watched him destroy himself, trying to make up for a failure that was never his fault. His voice roughened. and I blamed everyone except the people who actually deserved it. The commanders who ignored his warnings. The system that put him in an impossible position. I blamed women in combat because it was easier than blaming the institutions I had dedicated my life to serving. Marisol listened without interrupting. This was not an apology, not exactly. It was a confession, and she understood instinctively that Stokes needed to say it more than she needed to hear it. What you did today, Stokes continued, that shot after that approach. I could not have made it. Ryan could not have made it. He shook his head slowly. You proved something that I have been refusing to see for 3 years. That the right person is the right person, regardless of anything else. And you were the right person. Marisol considered his words. The anger she had carried toward him for weeks had faded somewhere during the mission, replaced by something more nuanced. Stokes was not a good man. He had treated her with cruelty, had tried to break her, had projected his grief onto her in ways that could have ended her career. But he was also a man who had lost someone he loved, who had been broken by that loss, and who was now trying to find his way back to something resembling human. I do not forgive you, she said carefully. Not yet. Maybe not ever. What you did to me in training was wrong, and you knew it was wrong while you were doing it. Stokes nodded slowly. I know, but I understand you. Marisol picked up Diego's coin, turning it over in her fingers. Grief makes us into people we do not recognize. It makes us hurt others because we cannot stand our own pain. She looked up at him. I'm choosing to believe that the man who left me that letter, who told me the truth about Ryan and Diego, that man is closer to who you really are than the one who tried to break me in the pool. Stokes was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. Your brother would be proud of you. Ryan would be too. He stood, straightened his uniform, and walked away without another word. Marisol watched him go, feeling the weight of the conversation settle into her bones. She finished her coffee alone, Diego's coin warm in her palm, and allowed herself to imagine a future where the past no longer defined her. The flight back to Coronado took 14 hours. Marisol slept for most of it, her body finally surrendering to the exhaustion she had been holding at bay. When she woke, the California coastline was visible through the small window, golden in the late afternoon sun. 1 week later, she stood in dress whites on the parade ground at Naval Special Warfare Command. The ceremony had been kept small by design, limited to those with clearance to know what had actually happened in a coastal compound halfway around the world. But the people who mattered were there. Captain Holloway stood at the podium, her voice carrying across the assembled ranks. Petty Officer Second Class Marisol Vega demonstrated exceptional courage, skill, and composure in the execution of a mission critical to national security. Her actions directly resulted in the elimination of a high-value target responsible for the deaths of American service members. She paused, letting the weight of the words settle. It is my honor to present her with the Navy Cross. Marisol stepped forward to receive the medal. The ribbon was blue and white, the cross itself heavy in Holloway's hands as she pinned it to Marisol's chest. Cameras clicked somewhere in the small crowd, capturing a moment that would be classified for years to come. When the applause faded, Holloway leaned close and spoke quietly. You have changed things, Petty Officer, whether you meant to or not. What you did out there will open doors for everyone who comes after you. Marisol nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. She returned to her position in the formation and let her eyes drift across the assembled faces. Toby stood 3 rows back, his expression proud. The other members of the support team were scattered throughout the crowd, their nods of acknowledgement carrying more weight than any medal. Senior Chief Vasquez watched from the side, her arms folded across her chest, something that looked almost like satisfaction in her eyes. And there, in the back row, stood Master Chief Vernon Stokes. He did not applaud. He did not smile. But when Marisol's gaze found his, he raised his hand to his brow in a slow, deliberate salute. She returned it without hesitation. After the ceremony, the crowd dispersed into small clusters of conversation. Marisol found herself surrounded by officers she had never met, all of them wanting to shake her hand, to congratulate her, to ask questions about the mission that she could not answer. She navigated the attention with careful grace, deflecting praise, redirecting credit to her team. When she finally extracted herself, Vasquez was waiting near the edge of the parade ground. "You did good," Vasquez said simply. Diego would have been proud. Marisol reached into her pocket and pulled out the photograph Vasquez had given her before the mission. Diego and Ryan, frozen in a moment of friendship, unaware of the tragedy waiting for them both. "I want you to have this back," Marisol said. "You kept it for 3 years. It belongs with you." Vasquez looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then she shook her head. "I kept it because I did not know what else to do with it. You gave it a purpose." She pushed it back toward Marisol. "Keep it. Let it remind you of what you are fighting for." Marisol tucked the photograph back into her pocket, next to Diego's coin. 2 pieces of her brother's story, now permanently part of her own. That evening, her mother called. Marisol had not told her family about the mission, could not tell them anything beyond the fact that she had received a commendation for exemplary service. But her mother's voice carried a weight that suggested she understood more than Marisol had said. "Your father and I watched the news this morning," her mother said carefully. "There was a story about a terrorist leader who was killed overseas. They did not say how. They did not say who. But I looked at the date, Mija, and I looked at the calendar. And I know my daughter." Marisol closed her eyes. "Mama, I cannot talk about it." "I know." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "I just want you to know that whatever you did, wherever you were, your brother was with you. I felt it. The day it happened, I felt him. Like he was at peace for the first time since we lost him." The tears came without warning. Marisol let them fall, not bothering to hide them even though she was standing in the middle of the barracks hallway. "I miss him," she whispered. "Every day. I know, Mija. I know." Her mother's voice was thick with emotion. "But you are carrying him forward. You are making his life mean something. And that is all any of us can do for the people we lose." They talked for another hour about nothing and everything, the way families do when words are not enough but silence is worse. When Marisol finally hung up, she felt hollowed out but whole. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it no longer defined her. She walked outside and stood on the beach where her journey had begun. The Pacific stretched out before her, vast and dark and full of secrets. Somewhere beneath those waves was the training pool where Stokes had tried to break her. Somewhere beyond the horizon was the cave system she had navigated in darkness, the compound where she had taken a life to save countless others. She pulled Diego's coin from her pocket and held it up to the moonlight. The metal gleamed softly, worn smooth by years of handling. "I did it," she said to the empty beach. "I did what you always believed I could do." The waves crashed against the shore in their endless rhythm, and Marisol allowed herself to imagine that somewhere, somehow, her brother was listening. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new missions, new opportunities to prove that the right person in the right position could change everything. But tonight, she simply stood in the moonlight and let herself feel something she had not felt in 3 years. Peace. Footsteps crunched in the sand behind her. She turned to find Toby approaching, 2 bottles of beer in his hands. "Thought you might want some company," he said. Marisol smiled and took the offered bottle. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the waves roll in, 2 warriors at rest in the brief calm between storms. To Diego, Toby said, raising his bottle. Marisol raised hers in return. And to Ryan, "May they both rest easy now." They drank to the fallen, and the ocean carried their toast out into the darkness. 2 months later, Marisol stood at the edge of the combat diving pool at Coronado, watching a new class of candidates prepare for their first underwater evaluation. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete deck, and the water gleamed with the same cold promise it had held the day she first arrived. 15 candidates this cycle. 3 of them were women. She remembered what it had felt like to stand where they stood now, uncertain and determined in equal measure. She remembered Stokes watching her with a stopwatch, waiting for her to break. She remembered the burning in her lungs, the pressure in her chest, the absolute refusal to give him the satisfaction of seeing her fail. Now, she wore instructor tabs on her uniform, and the stopwatch was in her hand. Master Chief Stokes stood beside her, his presence no longer a source of dread. They had not become friends. Perhaps they never would. But they had found a way to work together, to channel their shared history into something that served the candidates rather than destroying them. Any of them stand out yet? Stokes asked, his voice carrying the same gruff edge it always had. Marisol studied the candidates as they checked their gear. One of the women, a compact Latina named Petty Officer Third Class Rivera, moved with a quiet efficiency that reminded Marisol of herself. There was something in Rivera's eyes, a hunger that went beyond ambition, a need to prove something that could not be measured in evaluation scores. The one on the left, Marisol said, Rivera. She has something. Stokes nodded slowly. He did not question her assessment, did not demand evidence or justification. He had learned to trust her instincts the way he trusted his own. Then we will find out what she is made of, he said. The evaluation began. One by one, the candidates descended into the water, holding their breath against the burning urge to surface. Some broke early, gasping and defeated. Others pushed past the initial panic, but faltered as the minutes stretched on. Marisol watched them all with the careful attention she had once resented receiving. Rivera went seventh. She sank to the bottom of the pool with the controlled grace of a natural swimmer, settling into position with her eyes fixed on the surface above. Marisol started the stopwatch and waited. 1 minute. Rivera's expression remained calm, her body relaxed. 2 minutes. The first signs of strain appeared around her eyes, but her position held steady. 3 minutes. Rivera's diaphragm began to spasm visibly, her body demanding air that she refused to seek. Marisol remembered what 3 minutes felt like. The fire in the chest, the narrowing vision, the voice in the head screaming that death was coming, that breathing was survival, that another second was impossible. 3.5 minutes. Rivera's hands clenched into fists, but she did not move. 3 minutes and 45 seconds. Marisol saw something shift in Rivera's expression. The panic fading, the stillness taking hold, the discovery that the body's limits were not where it claimed they were. For minutes, Rivera surfaced with a gasp that echoed across the pool deck. She hauled herself out of the water on trembling arms, chest heaving, eyes bright with triumph and exhaustion. Marisol walked over to where Rivera stood, dripping on the concrete. The younger woman straightened to attention, water streaming down her face. For minutes and 3 seconds, Marisol said. She kept her voice neutral, professional. Not bad for a first evaluation. Rivera's jaw tightened. She wanted to ask if it was good enough, if she had passed, if she had proven whatever she needed to prove. Marisol recognized the questions because she had carried them herself. You have potential, Marisol said. But potential is just a starting point. What matters is what you do with it. She paused. I will be watching you, Rivera. Do not make me regret it. Rivera nadie sharply. Yes, petty officer. Marisol turned and walked back to her position beside Stokes. The evaluation continued, but her mind lingered on the woman she had just spoken to. In Rivera, she saw echoes of her own journey. The same hunger, the same determination, the same refusal to accept the limits others tried to impose. The world had not changed overnight because Marisol made one shot in a distant compound. The barriers that women faced in special operations had not magically dissolved. There would be more Stokeses, more crosses, more systems designed to filter out anyone who did not fit the traditional mold. But there would also be more Riveras, more women who refused to break, more warriors who would earn their place through sheer force of will and undeniable skill. And now there was someone to show them the way. After the evaluation ended and the candidates dispersed to recover, Marisol walked to the beach alone. The Pacific stretched before her, vast and endless, the same ocean that had nearly killed her and had ultimately made her. She pulled Diego's coin from her pocket and held it in her palm. The metal was warm from her body heat, smooth from years of handling. She thought about her brother, about the smile he had worn in the photograph with Ryan Kelleher, about the faith he had always had in her. She thought about Ryan, about the impossible position he had been placed in, about the guilt that had consumed him. She hoped he had found peace wherever he was now. She hoped Diego had found him and told him the truth, that his failure was not his fault, that he had done everything he could, that someone had finally finished what he started. She thought about Stokes, about the broken man who had tried to break her, about the slow and difficult work of rebuilding something from the wreckage of grief. They would never be friends, but they were no longer enemies. And sometimes that was enough. A breeze picked up off the water, carrying the salt smell of the sea. Marisol closed her eyes and let it wash over her. She had spent 3 years fighting to become the sniper her brother needed. She had pushed through every barrier, survived every test, made the shot that proved everything she believed about herself. And now she stood on the other side of that journey, no longer defined by what she had lost, but by what she had become. An instructor, a warrior, a path forward for everyone who would come after her. She opened her eyes and looked out at the horizon. Somewhere beyond the curve of the earth, there were more missions waiting, more targets that needed eliminating, more moments where the right person in the right position could change everything. She would be ready. Marisol tucked Diego's coin back in her pocket, turned, and walked toward the training facility where Rivera and the other candidates were recovering. There was work to do. There was a legacy to build. And there was a new generation of warriors who needed to learn that the limits they believed in were nothing but lies. If you connected with this story, drop a comment and let us know your favorite moment or character. Or share if you know someone who refused to quit when everyone expected them to fail. Those stories matter. Those people matter. And sometimes all they need is someone to believe in them the way Diego believed in Marisol.